You're listening to the Motivated Mindset Podcast with Bobby Stein.
Hello and welcome into another episode of the Motivated Mindset Podcast, and I hope that wherever you're watching or listening, that you're doing absolutely fantastic. And today, I'm bringing back Max Stevens once again. He's the return guest and the co-host of the short series we're running on the laws of the universe. And we're going to be discussing one of the granddaddies of them all, the law of cause and effect. And I think it was Emerson that said, it's such an awesome law that if it wasn't invented, somebody should go out and invent it. So pretty cool stuff. And, these laws kind of act like the law, for instance, like the law of gravity, right? You may not believe in it, but if you step off a 20-story building without a net, you're going to splat and, fully realize its effect. Much like that, these laws govern our very existence. So appreciate everybody stopping by. Thanks for tuning in. Max Stevens is in the house. Max, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. Thank you for asking.
That's awesome, buddy. So like I alluded to, this law is always in effect. And I think that, being in the realm of, in your profession, whereby you're transforming bodies, right? Physical bodies. You take a client, for instance, who's deconditioned and you set them through a number of paces and series of protocol, i.e. the cause, and then to experience a certain effect. And along that journey, you want to modify perhaps the protocol to maybe tweak the effect down the road. Is that right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So basically what you're doing is I always say you have to establish a baseline. So like, what is that person currently doing, right? I always say it's never to make it good or bad. We just want to see, because I think when we put those terms on it, it can just be perceived a certain way. So I try to be precise with my language. And look, it's just the baseline. Like we just got to we have to see where everything's at to get you moving forward. And then from there, we just try to make it more effective, the effect part, right? Because really, it comes down to is we're just byproducts of what we do or do not do. Right. So I just keep it real simple that way and just try to make things a little more effective, run a little more efficiently, and make it sustainable for the person. We can repeat these things over time to get the desired effect. I think that's big in being successful is not only consistency, but sustainability, meaning we can do it time and time again over time. I think that's where the real magic happens.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's super smart too. If something's sustainable and it's a rinse and repeatability scenario, to go ahead and do that. I think a lot of people though, and I think it's just a fact of the lack of awareness, right? That you kind of look at outside conditions as the effect and they try to address it. And you can attest to, Max, I think that you've got to get back to ground zero and look for that cause. Say, hey, what's making this? Big pharma is an example. Or any pharmaceutical medicine, right? Some are good, some are bad, but they address the effects and they kind of gloss over that there's a cause, that if we were only to address that cause, we probably wouldn't need as much pharma, right?
Yeah, very true. And a lot of times things can be solved in other ways, a little more of a natural or holistic route.
Right.
I'm not against big pharma by any means. I think a lot of times it can help prophylactically, right? Things that we just can't do with diet, nutrition, supplementation. I'm all for it, but that's kind of like the last means necessary, right? Let's exude all options going into it and see if we can get that, desired effect. And like you said, right, it's looking at like, what are we doing? Because we're looking at everywhere else. But I think what it really comes down to is like, what are we doing or not doing that's causing this? It's pretty simple, but you would think, right? But I think a lot of times I always say people kind of miss the forest aiming for the trees. They're looking, everywhere but where they need to look and, trying to make, it way more complicated than it is. And I'm not saying it can't be complex, but it is rather simple if you have a basic understanding. And it just goes back to everything, right? Is like, you know, um, we know what we know. And a lot of people think they know more than they do. And I don't say that in a nasty way. It's just, I can't tell you how many times I get questions and I give them my answer, right? And then they ask it again because they didn't like what the answer was. And I give them the same answer and they ask it again. And after like the third time, I'm like, look, I'm sorry, but this is just the answer was the first time. Like, I understood what you're asking, and my
Yeah.
answer is going to stay the same. So I'm not going to keep having the same conversation with you. Like, this is going in circles. You can either take this new knowledge and data, and apply it and get the result you want or the effect you want, or you can just be unhappy and keep asking, 9 different questions, but get the same answer and just not accept what reality is. So
Why do you think that is that people, and I'm not casting any dispersions by any means,
yeah.
but when they don't take that first answer, as you being an expert in a particular field, and they're coming to you with a sincere question, when you give them that answer, why is it that what rationale is going on in that individual's mind?
Well, if I had to speculate, because at the end of the day we never really know what goes on behind one's curtain, but if I had to take an educated guess, I think people have a preconceived answer, a preconceived expectation, and they're looking for validation that, okay,
Validate.
this is right, and they don't want to know what is actually right. They just want to be told they're right. And there's a big difference there. You know what I mean? And it's like,
Huge.
I think one thing I was taught a while back from a guy I trained with in martial arts was the art was based on polarity. And he said, you have two states. You have duality and polarity, and in this sense, duality is clashing. You're resisting. You're dueling. But polarity is when you flow, and instead of clashing, you're going with the energy and redirecting it. Right. So I kind of took that, and I always apply that to how I live. And I want to be polarity. I want to be in polarity. I want to flow. I want to be in the ebb and flow. I want to be adaptable. I don't know everything, and I like to learn and try to expand on my knowledge. So I think a lot of people just kind of don't have that mindset. They don't have that grasp, and they just live in duality. They're constantly clashing because what they think they know and what they should know are two different things. And a lot of times it's hard, somebody has a belief, no matter how fallacious it is, sometimes it's hard to uproot that belief, right? I mean, that's the that is the tale of our times right now. People get told the wrong thing, they're sold a deception, they buy into it, then the effect isn't what they wanted, but it's much harder to come to terms with, like, wow, I'm believing bullshit. Nope, I'd rather just believe bullshit and blame everything else. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to say, okay, maybe this wasn't the right train of thought or the right course of action, or you know what I mean? I think a lot of
I do.
people have that lack of accountability. And I think it goes beyond that, just an understanding of, like, things are subject to change and time tells all truths. And sometimes what we're told initially isn't what it is. And, time reveals that truth, and it's a harsh one. And, it's
They're
kind of
not
like,
ready to face that truth. Yeah.
exactly. So I'd rather live in my little shell and, condemn everyone and everything else instead of just looking at myself and
Looking in the
being,
mirror.
yeah. And we've talked about that, it all kind of coincides
It
back
really
one way or
does.
another.
Truly does.
Um, so yeah, that's just my speculation though, is I think people have these preconceived expectations or answers, and they're asking to be validated rather than asking for knowledge and to further expand. And I think that's where you kind of hit that little,
Does that
uh,
does that frustrate you as a
oh,
professional?
absolutely. Absolutely. It's
How do
frustrated
you?
me way
Yeah.
before I was a professional.
How do you?
Um,
How do you? Because I know you're a very strong-minded individual. When somebody, that pushback that you're getting from them, do you just want to grab them by the lapels and say, "Listen"?
No, I just
No.
my time. I only, like I said, at this point, after the second or third time they're asking it, and I finally realize what they're doing. I'm like, look, I've given you the answer the first time. My answer isn't going to change. You can do with it what you want. And I just tell people straight up, man.
Yeah.
And it's not nasty. It's not. But it's like, I'm not gonna. I don't have the energy to keep giving you the same fucking answer. Like, no
Yeah.
offense, but like, just take it. You don't have to do anything with it. But like this, my answer isn't going to change. So like, I'm not going to do the little, dozy do with you.
Song, song
Just,
and dance. Yeah.
yeah, I've, there's times people have just, talked about things that I have no interest in, or, a little gossipy and stuff. And I'm just like, look, man,
Yeah.
I really don't care. No
Yeah.
offense, but like,
Yeah.
I just don't care, like, it just doesn't
Well, you
entertain
know
me.
what? In terms of the law of cause and effect and gossip, as it were, right? As we sow, so shall we reap, right? So if we're involved in that realm and we're talking negatively or we're ingesting negative information about another through another, I mean, we're going to reap that, right? Eventually. We're going
Yeah.
to not only reap that, we'll probably reap a whirlwind of that. And it's
Yep.
just like if that individual or that entity or that group of people are in that mindset in that realm, well, chances are they're talking you up too. So, but getting back to, we're speaking with Max Prime Stevens, by the way. You can find Max over on the Instagram platform at Max Prime Steven. Go give him a follow. You'll be glad you did. But you know, if folks would like to have an expression, first they have to make an impression,
Yeah.
right? So that impression has to correlate with the expression. In other words, you can't sow an apple and get an orange. It's just not going to happen. You know what I discovered or I learned many years ago. And I'm sure you might be familiar with this. Media companies really, advertising, big advertising, they're all over this, and they were as back as the 30s, 40s, and 50s when they did the subliminal stuff, where they would make an impression subliminally. There was that famous study or that famous account of the folks being at the drive-in movie theater, and they all en masse, they all got up and went and got a Coke and some popcorn. And when they dissected it, was that they plugged in on one of the frames, which was 24 frames a second, which is what our mind can take in. They put in, "You're thirsty," or "Drink Coke." So it made that subliminal or subconscious message impression, and they had to express it. Now, it was kind of debunked, right? But if you think about this, how advertisers use it to get the effect that they want in terms of selling their product or selling their message, whether it be propaganda or a good message or whatever. Look at the technology now, Max.
Oh, yeah.
If we can only take in 24 frames per second physically, our eyes they have big screen TVs that have 4K, and the images are so fast. I'm sure that they're plugging stuff in there. Not to go down a rabbit hole conspiracy or anything like that. But what I'm saying is this: is that our brains and our subconscious don't understand the difference between something real or imagined, right?
Yeah.
And so it's going to be impressed upon. We're not consciously picking that up, but if we pick that up, or if we're in that realm of gossip and all this kind of stuff, we're planting seeds, and whatever we plant has to come to fruition, don't you think?
Yeah, well, that would be the effect, right? I mean,
Yeah.
in a very more simplistic, less rabbit holey way. I mean, just look at like if you look something up or mention a product, right? All of a
Yeah.
sudden you're getting 95 ads about it.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's something to it.
No doubt.
And yeah, it just is what it
But I
is.
like the organic part about it, because they've tapped into something that's really inborn and inherent in us. I mean, if we dwell on something, if we plant, again, and going back to sowing and reaping and cause and effect, if we plant a thought in our minds and we dwell on that and meditate on it, and we live as though, what's going to happen with that that resonation and that frequency and stuff? Our subconscious is going to go out beyond the five senses, and it's going to pick up folks that are vibrating at the same frequency and get it in. So, if, for instance, it's that reticular activating system, right?
Hmm.
The RAS in the back of our brain when we buy a car, all of a sudden everybody's driving the same damn car. It's like the
Yeah.
car was always there, but we never really noticed it because we're tuned into it. So, yeah, I think that the algorithm and what Apple picks up and, all those other things, it's no accident, right?
Oh, that's for sure. That's for sure.
Crazy stuff. But yeah, man, the law of cause and effect. It's powerful. And I think that if we're looking for a certain effect in our life, a certain outcome, if we have a desire, an objective, a goal to reach, I think that we've got to look at its origins to really kind of put it in certitude, or give it more certainty that we're going to get our outcome, on the
Yeah,
other end.
I think you almost have to like reverse engineer it. So like
That's a
see
great,
what
yeah.
the end goal is of whatever that might be, and
Hmm.
then phase it back to like where you're at now, and then you have an idea of how to get there. And of course be pliable, because it might not go exactly how you planned it. But that's something you do in bodybuilding, like with a prep for a show. You reverse engineer it. You're like, okay, I have X amount of weeks, like I want to be stage lean in 24 weeks. So you kind of backtrack it from there, and get an idea of like where to start. um, and you give yourself time for diet breaks and, refeeds and whatever. But, that's just something you kind of do with anything, I think, is you see where the end result is, okay, and how far am I from that now? And like, what are my steps or phases to get there? And I think when you do that, it just makes it a little more realistic and tangible, because now I have a plan, right? And it's like, okay, if I wanted to make, $100 million and I only got like $10,000. Well, I'm not going to go 10,000 to 100 million. The first goal will be 100,000, right? And then from there, probably 250. And then, again, we're just upping it from there. And then you kind of get a waterfall effect. As the more money you have, you tend to generate more money. And then, you can, but like I said, your first thought is not 10,000 to 100 million, it's 10,000 to 1 million, right? And I think if people take that approach, they'll be more successful, because now it's, again, you kind of have like short, mid, long term goals, to get there. And again, it just comes back down to like, what am I doing in my day to propel myself forward? I always say it's like laying a brick, right? So like if I lay one brick
Yeah.
up for the day and I have it lined up and it's all good, lay another brick in the same way. Eventually, I'm going to build a structure, right? And I have that completed structure that I desired when I first set out to lay those bricks.
Good analogy. Yeah.
So I think, that's the biggest thing with cause and effect is we're in most of the times, again, we are in control for the most part. And again, it comes down to like, what are we telling ourselves? What are we doing daily? And life happens, right? So we might
Sure.
get side, but I had a client ask me yesterday, he's like, dude, what do you do when, like you're struggling personally and, like this and that, and how do you like stay on track? And I was like, well, I don't let it affect my goal. Like my goal is separate from life happening. Like I compartmentalize. So
Compartment. Yeah.
I can go through all this personal shit, but like I still have to get my meals in for the day. I still have to get my daily water. I still have to do my daily steps. I still have to train, if that, you know what I mean?
You're
I still have to,
prioritizing that
yeah,
goal.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not going to stop. Just like if we always stopped when we had struggles and shit going on, we never get anywhere. So I think it's the people that just kind of look at it and is like we talked about last time, is we go through it, right? Instead of just trying to avoid it or stop. We just kind of trudge on, and you put your big boy pants on or big girl pants on, and you just kind of show up. And I think that's the thing. If you show up and you just show up every day and you put in a good effort and you're checking all your boxes, you're undoubtedly going to be successful. I mean, again, it's just a matter of showing up and being committed and playing a long game. And eventually you set yourself up to do something with it, because chance favors a prepared mind. So if I'm
Good.
prepared for this, right, once the opportunity comes, I can seize it. I'm not worried. I'm not nervous. I'm confident because I've been doing this. I've been living it. I've been breathing it. I've been manifesting it. I've been putting in the physical work. I've been doing everything
You've
for
got
it.
evidence. Yeah.
I visualize it millions of times before it ever happens. So then when it gets there, it's like, yeah,
You
this
walked
is
right
all
into
what
it.
everything, has been setting me up for, but I think, again, it just comes down to where is your mind and what are you consciously focusing on and how does that trickle down into the subconscious, right? Because I think they kind of coincide with one another. And again, we don't necessarily have control of our subconscious, but I think it can also be influenced by what we consciously believe. It's kind of like I was thinking today, like winning is a habit. I was thinking about that because people who win aren't people who never lost. They're just people who never gave up and learned through the process on how to become more successful and eventually win. And that's the perfect example of cause and effect, right? It's like, okay, I set out to do this. I went out and did try to do that, but I failed.
But
What
you
did I
but
do
you
wrong?
took the
I didn't get the
feedback.
desired effect,
Yeah.
right? My cause was here, didn't get the desired effect. Let me assess this. Okay, I could have done this and that better. Let me try it again. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
then you just get a little closer each time until you get it. And I think that's the biggest thing is just having a little fortitude and endurance and not being discouraged just because you don't get the immediate effect. I mean, story of my profession is everybody wants to try hard for a month or
Yeah.
diet for a fucking week and they don't have their goal physique and goal weight. And it's like, dude, you haven't done shit for like 10 years And like you want to put in work for even 3 months, like, put 3 months up to 10 years. It's not even a comparison, but like people want it yesterday, but it's like, okay, look at how much cause and effect. Your effect now is you did all these things, right? Or didn't do all these things. Well, we're going to have to kind of like put some time in the other way to turn the boat around. It's just not going to do a quick 180. So I think that's another interesting thing is like once people kind of get that goal, they have sometimes an unrealistic timeline. They feel like they're trying to make up for lost time or they're just super excited. And the motivation can be fleeting and
Wears off. Yeah.
And that's where commitment comes in.
Discipline.
Again, right? It's like, hey, I don't care how I feel. I don't care, what's going on. Like, I'm going to do this. If you have that attitude, then you're probably going to end up getting the desired effect.
How do you, speaking on those, to that, how do you temper somebody's expectations? In other words, from a physical aspect, somebody's got 10,000, wants to go to 100 million. Well, you just kind of broke that down and that's logical. And it's, you can get your arms around that. But when somebody comes to you who's been, out of shape or deconditioned out of the gym for 10 years and they want it in 3 months, how do you temper their expectation? What do you tell them? Do you
tell them the truth, man?
Get right in their face and say, hey, not for nothing. You got to put the brakes on. You're going down this hill. And once you apply the brakes, it's not going to stop immediately. It's going to take a second. You got to.
Yeah. I mean, for myself, integrity is everything. I've seen certain coaches and professionals just gaslight people, say things and hype them up, and then they don't produce, right? And that might feel good at first. But then when you pay money and you're not getting the effect you want and you realize that person has no clue what they're doing, you don't feel so good. So I think the biggest thing is being
and you're betrayed.
Honest. Yeah, being honest and managing expectations. And again, just putting it into scope, right? And like I said, it's like, hey, you haven't done anything for 5 to 10 years. You haven't had any diet awareness. You've been partying, whatever it is, right? So like we got to be consistent. We're going to have to run a few phases to even start to get somewhere with it. And I don't know when your body's going to respond. I just know if you keep doing what you're doing, it will respond. But our bodies aren't that different, but they're different enough to where I have to figure out when your body kicks in, how it tunes up, and it's just like fine tuning a car, right?
Yep,
it's like
same thing.
It's the same application, but they're all going to require a little different finesse. So that's the thing is just being honest, kind of like telling them what it is. Like I had a young guy wanting to do his first show back in February, and he's like, hey, I want to do a show June 14th. I said, okay. And he sent me pictures and I said, dude, I don't know if you're going to be ready in June 14th. I'm not going to tell you no, because it depends on how consistent you can be. But I'm just going to tell you, like, if we do June 14th, it's because you didn't miss anything and, like, you had a perfect prep because you are not 14 weeks out. And, like, we might have to push this back. And I'm not going to let you go on stage unconditioned. You know what I mean? Like, I'm just not going to put my name on something that doesn't look good. And it's a disservice to the client.
Yeah, sure.
It's a disservice to the client, So I said, if we have to, we'll push the show back, but let's shoot for June 14th. That's our intention. And if we're not ready, we'll know like a week out or so. We'll go ahead and push it back. I said, but you got to be on your stuff, man. Like you have to nail it. You have to act like you've done this before. Okay, I can. And he's nailed it, man. I'm really proud of him because we're actually going to be able to do the show. Wow. And I was like, wow, and we didn't have to, it wasn't a crazy prep either. It was actually really smooth. Didn't have to run him down. Like he's had to try, but it's not a brutal prep by any means.
Yeah.
Like I said, off rip, I had to manage that expectation and be like, look, man.
Yeah.
I'm not saying no, but I'm not going to say yes. Let's just see what happens in the course of these.
I think that's a wise tack to
weeks.
Take too. That was a wise way to go.
You want to almost like under promise and over deliver.
That's exactly what you want to do. Not almost. That's exactly what you want to do.
And like I said, for me, it's just about integrity and authenticity. There's so much self-proclaimed titles and people saying things that they quite haven't even done or come close to. And like I said, I almost undersell what I've done. I underhype what I've done and do. And people see what I do, and then it kind of attracts them. They're like, hey, man, like, you really know your stuff. Or like, hey, you're looking bigger, or whatever, And then they ask a question, and I give them an answer. And, it's always kind of makes sense. Not always, kind of. It always makes sense.
Yeah.
you connect some dots, and like I said, and then it kind of appeals because like, wow, this guy's doing it, and wow, that makes a lot of sense. Like, I could probably do this too. And it
Sure.
really just comes to like people just doing shit they already know, or like have an
Well,
idea of.
you're there to, I think the whole thing is really just they do know, and it's you're reminding them,
Yeah.
and you're congruent, and you're a living, walking, talking example. I love the way that you say you're not going to put your seal of approval or your stamp on something that's not ready, and that you have the balls enough and you have integrity and character enough to look them in the eye and say, no, man, I don't think so. We'll shoot for this date, but if it doesn't come to fruition, we're just going to have to back it up to the next show. I like that
Well,
approach.
it's something I've had to learn, because in the past it wasn't a lack of integrity. It was just wanting to make people happy, right? And like the person
People
didn't
pleasing, yeah.
necessarily care. They just wanted to make this show. They just wanted to do a show. They didn't necessarily care and whatever, whatever. And like I get all that, but after the last time I did that, which was years ago, I thought about it and I'm like, man, if we just would have given it another 4 weeks, it would have been so much better. And after like 18, 22 weeks, what's another 4 weeks, like what's another month? So I just kind of was like, you know what, moving forward, like I'm gonna hold a standard for them,
Yeah.
and if they don't want to do that, that's fine, they can go work with someone else. But I think just as you get a little more refined, and it's not that I never could do it before, like I said, it's just like, okay, you want to do that, that makes you happy, cool. But then I think just as I've progressed in my journey and with my standard, which I've always had a high standard, I want to cultivate that in others, right? And not let them settle for just okay. Like, let's try to be great. Let's try to shoot for greatness, whatever that might be for you. But we're not going to know if we just have let's just do this date. No, we're going to chase a physique. The physique will tell us when the date comes. And when you do that, I think you tend to be a lot more successful,
Yeah.
and it makes more sense for people because everybody wants to know time. How much time? How much time, right? And I'm like, I have no clue. Your body's gonna tell me, right? So like, same with a phase, like especially like a growth phase where people try and put on size. Well, how much time? As long as we can run it until your biofeedback gives us the sign, you're telling us your body's capped and we're done for that phase. As long as we can. Like I ran a 30-week growth phase before I started prep last year. 30 weeks.
That's a long
Most
time.
people are like, oh, I did a 12. Like, you're not doing shit in 12 weeks. You're not doing shit in 16. Bare minimum should be 20, if not more, right? And I had perfect blood pressure, perfect fasted blood glucose.
Oh,
I
you
was
took it the
excelling in
right
my
way. Yeah.
training. Yeah, and I prioritized everything. I covered all my bases and I ran 30 weeks of a growth phase, right? And that's the thing is like, and the only reason we stopped it was because then it was time to start prep. Probably could have run that for another 4 to 10 weeks, honestly. It just was like, it was just, we had everything lined up great, my coach and I. So that's the thing, right? Is like, in a cut phase, you do have, okay, let's shoot for 20 to 24 weeks. You give it a
It's a
little
little different.
buffer,
Yeah. I agree.
but like in a growth phase, when I tell people that, they're like, oh, no way. And it's like, yes, wait. Like that actually frustrates me when I hear people talk about doing something in 2 months, 3 months, 10 weeks. Like, dude, that's like not even a third of what a true phase should be, right?
Yeah.
So that is actually what does grind my gears is people think like it's gonna be this very short turnaround. Oh, I'm gonna do a 6 week cut or a 8 week bulk. It's like no, it's just you're
Yeah.
really selling yourself short.
I agree. Yeah, I totally agree. Well, I think a lot of times in the era that we live in, everything is instantaneous. I mean, everything. I think I looked at a statistic on Instagram where I was making these posts and I looked at the 3 second mark and how many people actually viewed past 3 seconds, and the vast majority did not. And
Oh
that's
yeah.
just it. I mean, 3 seconds is an eternity. So when that transposes over to everyday life, whether it's a hobby or a profession, or if we're trying to, do the bodybuilding and it doesn't, come to maturation in our timeline, our TikTok, Instagram timeline,
Yeah.
we get all, flustered. But there's a lot to be said for old school, doing it right, sowing those right seeds, nurturing them, cultivating them, watering them, fostering them, bringing them to a place where you can harvest them, not prematurely, but right on time.
Yeah, I mean, I think things happen when the time is right. Timing is everything.
It
It
really
really
is.
is.
I agree.
So
The older I get, the more I realize that.
yeah,
You know,
it's
you can't
timing is
jam a
everything.
square peg in a round hole. I mean, anybody can do anything they want at the end of the
Yeah.
day, right? You can jam a square peg in a round hole, but it's going to be all boogered up and everything.
No.
And if I think, and you talk to the deeper stuff, right? If you allow yourself life to let it unfold, we're going to, many times it unfolds on our behalf, but
Yeah.
we hasten it because we get our own will and our own desires, in the way, blocking it, and that's unfortunate. I really think, time can be our best friend or our worst enemy, but it can be an ally in a lot of areas.
Yeah, and I think knowing how to use that timing, there's a time to push, there's a time to coast,
Yes,
there might be a time to fall back a little bit.
the
And
seasons.
that comes down to just awareness, right? And kind
Mhm.
of reading your room, so to speak. Because like I said, we can go as hard as we want, but sometimes you just need that one day where it's just, hey, a reset day. It doesn't have to be a week, but just, hey, that one day where you kind of reset, you do things that kind of make you feel whole, that make you feel happy, which would be as simple as going to the beach and reading a book, but
Yeah,
that's a pullback, and then the next day, boom, I'm throttling again,
right.
kind of having those balances. But yeah, man, timing is so critical because it's like sometimes it's just not your time. You could be doing everything right, and it's just for whatever reason it's not
Yeah.
your time, and like looking back it's like, it could happen
Ah,
later on. It's like, well, okay, if I got it back then, I might have fucked it up once I had it.
big time,
Like so,
big time.
so
Thankfully, you didn't get it.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Sometimes we get blessed with the block.
blessed with the
So
block. Yeah.
it is what it is. But again, it just comes down to, I think, being pliable and understanding, like, hey, if I just keep showing up and I keep putting in the right effort, eventually I'm going to get the desired effect. I think it's really that simple. It's just a matter of consistency over time. And, also there is a time. Sometimes you got to bet on yourself, right? Sometimes you might have to be aggressive, put all your chips in on yourself.
Full
But I think you
throttle.
have to be at a certain level. Um, Mentally, physically, emotionally, you have to be at a certain level. You can't just be a novice and just dump all your chips like you don't know what you're doing. But once you kind of have skin in whatever game it is, and you have experience and you have insight and you kind of have foresight now from understanding how things work and where they're going, then
Wisdom.
I think there's a time where, hey, yeah, I'm gonna throttle this. Like I'm taking the governor off. You know what I mean? And I'm dumping them all in. I'm coming in hot and
I'm
heavy.
coming in
And
hot, baby.
and I think fortune favors the bold, right? So I think there is a time for all that, but it's not often. A lot of times it's kind of
Yeah.
a slow
It's
play.
the exception,
Um,
not the rule. Yeah.
yeah, slow and steady wins the race, but
Yeah.
I think there will come a point in whatever you're doing when it's like, okay, I have all this skill accrued, I have all this knowledge accrued, I have all this insight accrued. Like, I'm gonna
I'm
be
going to
ballsy
apply
right
it.
now. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Yeah, and like I'm gonna just, drop the game. So I
Yeah.
think that happens, but I think it's earned. Sometimes people get lucky, right? Lucky's cool, but you don't learn anything. I think there's something to be said about the trials and errors along the way, finding out what recipe of cause and effect sets you up for success. It's much more sustainable after you get it, right? Because if we just kind of don't do anything and it falls in our lap, what did you learn? Nothing.
Look at the vast majority of the lottery winners, right? There's
Oh yeah,
statistically, if they do a scratch off and they win $5 million, I
they're
know
broke in 3 years.
they really are, and I know of an individual with that dollar amount who was broke in 3 years,
Yeah.
and mentally, emotionally, they're not set up, and you have to, you have to become, we have to become, I have to become the person I want to exhibit, and actually, if I'm not, I'm going to fold like a cheap suit, like a deck of cards. So
Well, when it comes to money, cause and effect of money, right? People don't understand that money has to make money. Still, money is dead money.
stagnant.
So, yep, right. So here's the thing. It doesn't matter how much you make, but you should always be putting something aside so that it can grow passively. And the best way for most people to do is just the stock market, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin these days,
Bitcoin, yeah.
and okay, so I do that, but here's the problem. right? People just, oh, I don't make enough. What's $20 a week? You can afford that. You know
Set
what I
it
mean?
aside, a
Yeah, and
small
it doesn't
percentage.
you don't have to put away a fuck ton. But the point
You'll
is
never miss it. Yeah.
you hear people like, oh, if I won the lottery, I'd get this, and that, right? I always tell people,
That's backwards. That's
I'm
backwards.
investing 75 to 80% of the money I win. That other 20% I win, maybe I buy this, maybe I buy that. And if I have it left over, I'm investing it. So then that money makes money. I
Yep.
now have passive income and I'm going to live off that money for a very long time. Or I can buy a business that has cash flow, let it
Flows.
build, sell it in 2 to 5 years, make more money.
Cash
You know what
out.
I mean? So,
Yeah.
again, but you never hear people talk like that. But again, it's the cause and effect, right? Money is not infinite. It takes a long time to not worry about money. But if you don't start worrying about it now, in the sense of like, how can I make it grow without me being active? You're never going to get there. You're going to be busting your ass until you're 70.
Yeah.
You're going to work because you have to, not because you want to. And I
Exactly.
think there's something to be said in that. Because I know guys that are well off in their 60s and they could retire, but they love what they do.
It's
So they
not. Yeah.
work
It's
because
not
they
working.
like to.
Hmm.
Yeah, it is work, but they're like, you know what? I'll retire next year, and they're just making money, having fun, but they can do whatever they want, and
Yeah.
I think that's the cool thing is like
That is cool.
working because you want to, not because you have to, and like everything is straight. But I think most people miss that mark of like, how do I get to that everyone wants that, right? Everybody wants financial freedom, but you never hear people talk about what can I do to make that spark and move forward. Well, again, be smart with your money. Stop buying shit you don't need. Live below your means, right? What am I doing? I'm buying all this shit I don't need, right? I'm keeping up with the Joneses. I'm going on vacations that I haven't earned, right? I get it. Traveling is cool, but guess what? That place is probably going to be there in the next 5 to 10 years. So you could save those thousands of dollars, put it towards making dollars, right? And then go take that trip off of free money that your money made you. You know what I mean? But people always think in short term, and that's the problem, right? Is I think with cause and effect, it's big to have a larger picture than right now, right? Like, again, let's look further out than 5 years, than tomorrow, than this year. Where do I want to be in 20 years? Where do I want to be in 30 years, right? Maybe 10. But, I don't think people even look that far
No.
and they just think, oh, I'm going to have money. They just, I'm going to be, they don't think about it. I think they just kind of tell themselves it'll be fine. But no, it's not going to be fine because your cause is fucked up and you're not putting the right things in to make the right effect. You know what I mean? That's the thing is, with money and cause and effect, it's just you have to see the bigger picture. What's my end game? And like, yeah, you might want to live a little tight. You might want to live below your means. That's fine. You know what I mean? Because eventually you're going to be able to do whatever you want and get that breathing room, but it's going to take some time.
I have that saying that says, I don't want to forfeit a long term feast for a short term appetite.
Exactly.
And you know what, Max? As I get older, I'm 62, and the time is fleeting. Yet 40 years ago, a 62-year-old man was a dinosaur. He was a fossil. But I'm still viable and stuff. And that's just it. And people, they're living longer for whatever reason. But you're going to get to that end game of age 70 or whatever it was. You didn't take a minute and put away 10% of your gross or whatever your net, and you're still working. You're pushing grocery carts, and
Yeah.
and it's just unfortunate. I want to be that individual that wants to work because he wants to work, not because he has to work.
100%, man. I think that should be the goal, right? And again, that takes sacrifice, that takes patience, that takes
Sacrifice,
vision. But I think you have to have vision too, right? Like,
big time.
understand the game you're in. In this sense, everyone's in this game because we all need money to live and do shit, right?
Absolutely.
So we should all have a basic understanding of how this works and how to try to quote unquote accrue wealth, right? And there's only so many ways you can do that. So once you understand that, put a plan forth, reverse engineer it, and set short term, mid-term, long-term goals and say, hey, by this age, I want to have this. And by that age, I want to have this, like figuratively.
Yeah.
And then once you get that, it's like, cool, next one. And then you might even get ahead. You know what I mean? It gets pretty exciting.
Well, there comes that tipping point when it does turn a corner and it becomes exciting. Yeah. But it's just
Well,
like
yeah.
bodybuilding and reverse engineering it. I think vision is key. If you can look down that, and I mean, as simple as taking a pad of paper and writing out, your future self and where you want to see yourself at. What would I be doing at age 80? Or whatever, and then backing into it. This is what's going to be required. I mean, the rate of inflation, folks get a nominal raise every year or two, whatever. It's not covering the cost of inflation. A CD in the bank at 3% doesn't cover the rate of inflation. So it's almost like if you've got $10,000 stashed under the mattress and you haven't given it any foresight because you're more concerned with the return of your money than on the return on your monny, that 10,000 is going to be worth 7,000 in 5 years. So you got to get smart about it and just read a book or whatever,
Yeah, absolutely, man. Success leaves clues, right? So like, what are the people that have what you want doing?
Model yourself after them. Look at look at what these guys are doing, and it's not rocket science, and you can get wealthy in anything, whether you're cleaning floors or it doesn't really much matter.
Oh, all day, man.
Absolutely.
Like pest control services, lawn services, plumbing, electrician, all those things.
Endless opportunities. Pressure washing.
Several people that have made great livings and have, don't worry about shit. And it was pool cleaning companies, lawn care, etc. And it's like, yeah, I get it. It's not sexy, but hey, it pays. And that's the thing. At the end of the day, do you want to just, care about what other people might think, or do you want to be able to just do whatever the fuck you want on your own terms? It's really that simple, right?
Yeah, it's that simple. So take control of, got to take control of what's going on between our ears and behind our eyeballs, Max. That's the moral of the story. We want
100%.
We want good experiences. We got to make good impressions. If we want to eat the right fruit, we got to plant the right seeds, and that is our rendition, folks, as humble as it may be, of the law of cause and effect, right, Max?
Yeah, I agree. Yes, sir.
Cool beans. Well, you have listened to, that wraps it up for another episode of the Motivated Mindset Podcast. And for my esteemed guest, Max Prime Stevens, who you can find over on the Instagram platform, please do, at Max Prime Stevens. Give him a follow. I am your host, Bobby Stein. And until next time, please, folks, take good care. And thanks for tuning in. Max?
Thank you, guys. Have a good one.
Thanks, partner. We'll catch up real soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Later, brother.
You've been listening to another episode of the Motivated Mindset Podcast with your host, Bobby Stein. Thank you for tuning in.